and welcome. I'm Geeta Mohan and you're watching World Today. Former President Donald Trump continues to bear the brunt of his unending legal woes. Federal prosecutors have issued a new toned-down version of an indictment accusing Trump of plotting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Some charges were stripped and some others tweaked to help the case survive the Supreme Court's recent ruling granting all the former presidents broad immunity. The Office of Special Counsel Jack Smith issued the revised indictment to preserve the bulk of their case against the former president. The new indictment brings the allegations in line with the Supreme Court's landmark ruling that former presidents are immune from criminal prosecution while in office. It kept the basic structure of the first indictment, issued nearly 13 months ago, which accused Mr. Trump of involvement in plots to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The tone of the new charges was apparent from the first paragraph of Mr. Smith's filing, which described Mr. Trump as a candidate for President of the United States in 2020. The original indictment had referred to him as the 45th President of the United States and a candidate for re-election in 2020. The reworked case unfolding in Washington, D.C. is one of 4 indictments against Trump. Only one of these 4 cases, however, has culminated in a conviction. In May, Trump was found guilty of 34 charges of falsifying business records in New York. Even that verdict has been thrown into potential legal limbo as a result of a recent Supreme Court immunity verdict. This comes in the middle of Trump's full-fledged presidential campaign, which will undoubtedly turn out to be a problem for the GOP, that's the Grand Old Party. Prosecutors also included several of Trump's posts to Twitter, now known as X, in relation to the January 6th rally and wrote that the former president often used his social media account for personal purposes and to cause friction. Now, one of the most significant changes between the 45-page indictment then and now 36-page indictment is that prosecutors removed allegations that Trump had pressured the Justice Department between November of 2020 and January of 2021 to support his baseless claims that the election results were stolen. However, the central charges remain identical to the first version of the indictment, that Trump entered into a conspiracy to defraud the United States. It details out how Trump allegedly stoked his supporters to action, pressured election officials, and entered into a scheme to falsify electoral college votes. I spoke to Professor James Sample of the Hofstra Law School, and this is what he had to say about the indictment and how that would impact not just former President Donald Trump's presidential campaign, but what happens should he actually win the elections. Take a listen. The whole interview is available on India Today Global. Let's begin with why the amendments. We've been looking at all the details of the case, trying to understand what's really happening. Is there politics involved in this, or are we looking at real strong reasons why there have been amendments made to the indictment in the insurrection case of January 6th?
Well, it's great always to be with you again, Geeta, and it's a very good question. I think that anytime you're talking about a prosecution of a former president who's also the nominee of one of the 2 major parties, politics can't be entirely separated from any aspect of the process. But Jack Smith, who is the special prosecutor who's handling the prosecutions both of the classified documents case and of the insurrection and election interference case related to January 6th in 2021, he is the special prosecutor. And this act of amending the indictment, a so-called superseding indictment, which is just a fancy phrase for a replacement, an additional indictment in place of the earlier one. It is mostly a legal decision rather than a political decision. And what he's doing is he's replaced the initial indictment with this new indictment because the Supreme Court on July 1 ruled that the president, or the former president in this instance, was immune from from prosecution for certain activity. And so he's had to circumscribe, he being Jack Smith, circumscribe and cut out some of the material that was in the initial indictment. What we have now is a more focused indictment of the president, the former president, but it does remove some of the key evidence that would have been useful to the prosecution if Mr. Trump were to actually face a trial in the January 6th insurrection case.
Well, that's very, very interesting, Professor. But then again, in terms of process, the fact that it's more focused, the fact that the amendments have changed a lot of things and are now aligned with what the Supreme Court ruling really was, what does this mean for the process itself? Will that be, will the pace of this indictment and the judicial process really be faster now, or will it take its own course and let the elections of the November 5th follow through before we can actually see some ruling on this matter? Because we'll go to the other one, which is on the 17th of September. But on this case, do you think it'll be after the 5th of November, or is a focused, more amended indictment really going to take it through to sentencing or trial or whatever that may be before the 5th of November?
Really good question. And Geeta, I think that the answer is next week, Judge Chutkan, who is the trial court judge in the January 6th case, is holding a hearing, and she's going to decide how she wishes to proceed with respect to the very, very difficult task that the Supreme Court has handed to her, and that's figuring out every single granular piece of evidence in the indictment or allegations in the indictment, whether it qualifies as immune from prosecution or not immune, in which case it can be part of a case. There is no chance, I think, unfortunately, there's no chance that this will be tried in any meaningful way prior to the election in November. But if Judge Chutkan chooses to have what it would be known as a pre-trial evidentiary hearing, that would be fairly damaging for Mr. Trump, because it would shift the focus from his campaign to what he did or didn't do in January of 2021 and in December of 2020. So this case will not be tried before the election, and that is really the biggest win that Mr. Trump has had. The same is true with the classified document. The two federal cases, as well as the Georgia case that he's facing, his strategy has not been to defend his conduct on the merits, but has rather been to delay. His real goal is to win the election, because if he wins the election, then as president, he will be in charge of the Department of Justice, the federal cases, and he will dismiss them. He'll drop them. It's a rare power that you have. And up until July 1, presidents never had this immunity before. This is a new development, and I would argue not a positive development for the United States in terms of the rule of law. But to be able to delay the process the way he has, to be able to carve out acts as immune even when he was breaking the law, and then potentially to be in a position to drop the case against yourself, that's a combination of powers that not many criminal defendants have in history have ever had.
Professor Sample, thank you so much for joining us. That's Professor James Sample from Hofstra Law School, joining us to explain to us what's really happening in the United States of America. How much of a trouble is Donald Trump really in, and will that impact his presidential run? As also, should he win the presidency, will he continue or will he be able to run the country as president? Thank you so much for joining us over here on India Today.
As the countdown begins for the November 5th U.S. presidential election and polls suggest Kamala Harris is leading in the race, both the camps are now focusing on IVF and other reproductive treatments. Trump promises that government will pay for IVF if he comes to power. Let's take a listen to what the two sides have to say in this battle of words.
Announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women, IVF treatment. Because we want more babies, to put it very nicely. And for this same reason, we will also allow new parents to deduct major newborn expenses from their taxes.
Now, Kamala Harris said, "When we fight, we win." This is one of her favorite taglines. And I don't know if you saw it, but then Tim Walz stood up and shouted, "And even when we don't fight." That's what Tim Walz said. Now, he lies about everything, of course. He calls me weird, but then he lies about how his kids were conceived. Who does that? That's just the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
IVF and fertility treatments. And this is personal for Gwen and I. If you've never experienced the hell that is infertility, I guarantee you know somebody who has. And I can remember praying each night for a phone call. The pit in your stomach when the phone had rang, and the absolute agony when we heard the treatments hadn't worked. It took Gwen and I years, but we had access to fertility treatments. And when our daughter was born, we named her Hope.
He knows what he's doing. I did encourage him to get this over with. You want to get it over with. It has to get over with fast. But have victory, get your victory, and get it over with. It has to stop. The killing has to stop.
We are fighting for a democracy. Everyone has a right and should have their voices heard. I am speaking now, but on the subject, I will say this. The president and I are working around the clock. We've got to get a hostage deal done and get a ceasefire done now.
My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land. In this case, the law of the state.
Every state in the South, except for Virginia, has a Trump abortion ban. And think about that. Many, with no exceptions even for rape and incest. That is immoral. Immoral. And let us all agree, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do.
Now, keeping a track on Donald Trump's presidential campaigns can be an entertaining pastime. Amid all the fake news, the lewd remarks, and the dystopian portrayal of America in danger, we often overlook one thing: his dancing. At many campaign stops, the former president engages in what has become his signature dance. But do you know his dance can cost him millions? My colleague Shashank Mattu decodes this for you.
US elections are just around the corner, and there is no politics without a little drama. In the wild world of US politics, many things would surprise you. But would you believe us when we say that Donald Trump's signature dances at his rallies could actually cost his party millions? Trump's rallies are not just about speeches, they're about turning political events into major dramas. Trump and his Republican Party are being slammed for using popular songs by singers without their permission, and he faces damaging and costly multi-million-dollar lawsuits for that. Take Isaac Hayes' estate, for example. His song "Hold On I'm Coming" from the 1960s has been a Trump rally favorite, but his son is furious and is demanding $3 million from the Trump campaign for using the song without permission. Celine Dion's team also spoke up. "My Heart Will Go On" appeared at a Montana rally. Dion's team said that this use of their song was unauthorized. Beyoncé is by far the most famous celebrity involved. Trump used her song "Freedom" in a campaign clip. Her team slapped a cease and desist on Trump, and the clip was removed fast, but the message was clear. So will the Republican Party pay the fine, or will Trump be seen in his second most favorite place in the world, the court?
Now, US elections is not just about what the campaign management team is doing or what the presidential nominees are really doing. It's also about who is endorsing whom. Now, Taylor Swift, one of the most important brand ambassadors when it comes to elections last time around is also in question this time around. She is yet to endorse Kamala Harris, but Swifties have come out in full support of Kamala Harris. Here's a report from my colleague Ishita Mitra from India Today Global. Take a look.
Global pop icon Taylor Swift is yet to endorse a presidential candidate in this election, yet her fervent fan base is already mobilizing support for one. The Swifties for Kamala coalition officially launched a virtual rally that included a lineup of guest speakers like Carole King and Senator Elizabeth Warren. Now, this virtual rally has raised almost about $140,000 for the Harris campaign, and according to reports, about 26,000 Swifties joined the Zoom call on Tuesday. However, you should know that Taylor Swift has no affiliation with this group, and nor was she present in the virtual call. In fact, she is yet to comment on the 2024 election. Although Swift did ultimately back the Biden-Harris campaign in the previous election in 2020. So now, with all the speculations doing rounds on social media, can Taylor Swift directly endorse Kamala Harris? The buzz surrounding a possible endorsement has been fueled by her continued advocacy for causes which are typically supported by the Democratic Party. For instance, Swift has been a vocal advocate of LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and racial justice. Now, these values closely align with Harris's platform and record. Moreover, Swift has a strong following among a younger demographics, a group that the Democratic Party aims to mobilize in this election. So while it remains uncertain whether Swift will endorse Harris or not, it is likely that she will continue her activism in ways that promote voter engagement and the issue she cares about.